Welcome to another episode of the Mixed Signals podcast from us here at Semaphore Media, where we are talking to all of the most interesting and consequential people shaping our new media age. I'm Max Tawney. I am the media editor here at Semaphore, and with me, as always, is our editor-in-chief. He's also my boss. I could be fired by this man, is Ben Smith. How's it going, Ben?
Good. We need to talk more at the end of the show.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The person we'll be speaking to before this ominous meeting that Ben has just talked about is Paula Kerger. She is the CEO of PBS. Now, usually Paula is a figure who does not necessarily want to be out there in the media all the time talking about things. And PBS generally has been a pretty sleepy organization, not one that's been very controversial. But this year, all of that changed when the federal government and the Trump administration decided to claw back funding from PBS and restrict funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds PBS and NPR. This was a really, really big deal for people who grew up watching PBS. Just as a full disclosure for our listeners, my parents would plop me down in front of the television to watch PBS. We didn't watch other stuff, but that was always okay. Ben, it seems like you, in preparing for the show, we talked a little bit. It seems like you did not grow up, and your kids did not grow up with that kind of relationship with PBS. So you're coming in here a little bit more skeptically.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. My parents were more extreme and didn't let me watch TV at all. They considered even PBS sort of, potentially corrupting.
So Ben, you were not particularly shocked when Trump and Republicans decided to get rid of this funding. And in some ways, you kind of think, and I'm putting words in your mouth, that this was kind of something maybe that needed to happen.
I guess I do think that in this era of sort of proliferating media, it is a little hard to make the case for government funding of media. I mean, it's harder and harder.
Well,
I don't want to be too much of a bad cop here.
You know what? Okay, yeah, fair enough. I'm sorry. I don't mean to put you in that situation. Well, I don't want to box you in as the bad cop here, and I get to be all weepy and sympathetic. But we actually have Paula waiting for us, and we do have a lot of questions about the value of public media in 2025 and the future of funding for PBS and NPR. But she's a lot better equipped to answer those questions, so we'll bring her in right after this. Paula, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We actually had to move this interview around, so we also appreciate your flexibility here. So many, I think, our listeners over-index on people who read and know about the media. It's the point of our show. But I don't know if everybody, including maybe one or two of the hosts of this program, have kept up with all of the ins and outs of what's gone on this year with PBS and the funding rescissions. So can you just walk us through a little bit in terms of what the latest is in terms of how the funding stands? We because obviously people were paying attention earlier this year, but if you could just let us know kind of what the latest is.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year. If you want, I can walk you through the year in about 3 minutes or 3 hours, whatever you want.
Please. It's a podcast. We can go as long as you want.
It's been quite an adventure. So, we started the year actually in January with a letter from Brendan Carr saying that, he thinks we're running advertisements, and if we are, he was going to Congress to see that we be defunded. It's not exactly the kind of letter you would expect from the chair of the FCC. That was actually followed some weeks later with actually a formal letter of inquiry, asking to look at all of our information over the last 3 years, which we've sent, and we're now waiting to hear back. So that was the first thing. Then behind that might have been the Marjorie Taylor Greene letter inviting me to testify at her DOJ hearing. The title of the hearing is Un-American Airwaves Holding the CEOs of PBS and NPR to Account. Following that was the effort to eliminate the Democratic appointed members of the CPB board, Corporation for Public Broadcasting Board. Remember that organization is set up to administer federal funding. It's a private nonprofit organization, but the federal appropriation goes through them, and then they're responsible for really making sure good stewardship of federal dollars. Following that was the executive order that basically said that any federal funds to public television or public radio, PBS or NPR, would be illegal, and that no organization that receives federal funds could use any of those money to buy anything from us. The day after that executive order, we lost the funding for all of our kids' content. That was under a grant program out of the Department of Education called Ready to Learn. And that had been a 30-year grant program, renewed every 5 years. Last time it was renewed was actually under the last Trump administration. And that was immediate pens down. You can spend no more dollars, and we had to cease everything. House vote, we lost. We thought we had the votes, and then at the 11th hour, we didn't. Senate vote, even more painful. We thought we had the votes, and Senator Collins was advancing a bill that would have taken some cuts out of the national organizations in interest of preserving for the local stations, which in my mind was the most important. That bill never actually made it to the floor. The original bill did, and we lost. So that was in July. And so since July, we've been working to figure out how to make sure that particularly our vulnerable stations across the country who are even more heavily reliant on federal funding, sort of make it through this period. If you remember the Newt Gingrich contract with America, that was a 3-year glide path that would have taken us to zero funding. This was basically a 3-month glide path. And some of our stations, in aggregate, it's about 15% of their funding comes from the federal government. That's bad. But some of our stations, particularly in small rural communities, it's as much as half of their funding. And for them, it's existential. And so we've been working really hard to get some funds put aside so that, they can figure out what a longer-term plan is if, in fact, the federal funding doesn't come back. I have not given up hope for that, and we can talk about that, too.
So you've been kind of fighting these fights and managing this political process, not quite since Gingrich, I guess, but quite a while since the Bush administration. Does this generation of Republicans, are they different? Do they hate you more?
It's funny. We've always had bipartisan support. I mean, even people like Barry Goldwater, going way back, they supported public broadcasting. I mean, this is where Bill Buckley had his home on firing line. And so, there have definitely been moments, probably before Gingrich, it was during Richard Nixon, that had really made a run at trying to, defund us. And many people remember a very famous testimony by Fred Rogers, who made the case of why this is important and what we do, and particularly the work that we do for kids. I've thought about this a lot. I actually did not believe that we would be defunded, even in this round, because I've spent a lot of time since I've been in this job traveling around and spending time in communities across the country. I've been in a lot of small communities. I know how important those stations are. I also know this is a place where a lot of legislators appear, these are the stations that usually give them airtime for debates and town halls and so forth, and they're very much a fabric of the community. I would say what's different this time is what we're seeing across a lot of other parts of decisions that are being made, which is a real determination to stay together and to follow the lead of the White House. And that is different than anything that we've seen before. I would say that I had really hoped that, ultimately when votes would happen for our funding, that legislators would remember their local stations, and in this case, they did not.
It's interesting because you mentioned the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Doge hearings from earlier this year. And as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about this journey that she has been on recently, where she's obviously clashed with the White House and with Trump on a few different matters. And I'm really curious. I wonder if you think that the coalition that wanted to defund, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, if that coalition is going to stay together, or if you think you can peel back some of the Republicans who voted against you guys earlier this year.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. This is where why I think that there may be a possibility here, because since we were defunded, a few things happened that surprised me a bit. One is there were legislators that said, wait a minute, wait, what? This Corporation for Public Broadcasting is going to go out of business? It's like, well, didn't you understand that if you were not funding it, it probably wasn't going to exist? The other were the number of people that said, wait a minute, what? This means my local station? And I think that somehow, and I really don't understand this, because we've spent a lot of time, mostly our stations actually, have spent a lot of time making sure that legislators understand, where the money that they're putting aside for public broadcasting goes. Look, I never make an assumption we're going to be funded. There are a lot of hard choices that legislators have to make about where to put federal money. And I always feel like we have to earn it every year. And I always feel like we should never make the assumption that people understand what we are and what we do and how it fits into the scheme of everything else they're balancing. But what did shock me is the number of the people that just seemed so surprised that this was going to put so many stations at risk. And so that is actually where I am hoping we can turn this a little bit. All of our stations, most people are not aware that we're the backup system for the emergency alert for the country. That means not just for individuals that are hearing about, emergencies, but it also is how information is fed to first responders. That there are many people in this country that rely on over the air. We are the lifeline. There are a lot of kids, half the kids in this country are in informal pre-K. And so, we're a lifeline of information there. This is what you're cutting off.
And obviously there are, just sort of on that point, then sort of a technological point almost, you are, I guess it seems to me risky to ally yourself so closely to what is just obviously a dying technology. Like, I'm glad they do emergency alerts over the air, but gosh, I don't know a lot of people who watch over the air anymore. And that may be my own urban bias, but that's not the future. But I don't think, are you arguing that 50 years from now, super important that we have over-the-air broadcasts? It just feels like a dying technology.
Yeah, I'm arguing right now there are a lot of people that rely on over-the-air. And there are a lot of people that, it may be for geographic reasons or it may be for economic reasons, that are really very much beholden to over-the-air. And, if you live in a city and if you live around a lot of people that spend all of their time or a lot of their time consuming media from different digital platforms, and we have a robust presence there too. So I'm not suggesting that, we are just locked into broadcast as our sole purpose. But what I am saying is that you're talking about a lot of people that always get left behind. And I think in this moment when people are getting hammered on so many other levels, whether that's access to food and access to, other services, healthcare, to also cut off information feels like not a great idea. And so I think that, part of the infrastructure that I'm talking about also in being the backup for emergency alert is also how information is pushed out. So even in places that have a lot of digital technology, what happens if you're in a place that has an emergency and those systems get overwhelmed very quickly. And to get information pushed out to a lot of people, a one-to-many technology is a really good solution, and it's a built structure, and shouldn't we be supporting it at least in the short term?
That does sound in a way like an argument that PBS is sort of an important part of the past and of the present, but not of the future. Is there a sort of, that's what's funny. We talked to the guy, who's frantically trying to pivot MSNBC, for instance, away from cable, another dying technology. Like, how do you think about that? How do you sort of persuade people that, this must be a big part of your job?
Well, it's not just the technology, it's the content we produce, right? So, I spend a lot of time looking at what other people do on different platforms. And let's give one example, because I just referenced it a minute ago, which is kids content. So if you are deeply focused on what's happening in kids media right now, you should be concerned. So a lot of the streamers don't really need much kids content, unless you're Disney. You really don't need a lot to keep your subscription base going. You can have a couple shows that work for you, but nobody subscribes to, an HBO, for example, to get kids content. And so
I don't know. K-pop Demon Hunters was a pretty big phenomenon.
That's a different kind of programming, right? And so, and what's happened is a lot of kids have been pushed to YouTube, and a lot of YouTube content is, I'm not saying all, but there is a lot of content that kids are consuming. In fact, some of the most popular, benign at best, and sometimes not really safe for kids. And no one is actually thinking about, I always use this analogy, we use the same tools, we're just not in the same business. Ultimately, my success is not going to be judged by how much I'm returning to a shareholder. Our work is judged based on how we are meeting the needs of the public that's not been met in other places. I mean, I hate always defining ourselves as we're what others are not, but a lot of other organizations don't exist for the same reasons we do, which is to, as in the case of kids, making sure that first time they enter school, whether they, half the kids in this country are not in formal pre-K. So the first time kids enter school, we want them to have at least a chance of being on the same level of kids that have access to more content. And so whether that is the content we produce that provides basic skills, it's getting kids excited about learning, it's also helping them, deal with their emotions. This is what Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is about, which is based on Fred Rogers. I mean, no one else is doing this. And so what's happening is the marketplace is drying up. A lot of people that are kids producers are moving on to other things because it is much harder now to produce this kind of content. And we can be satisfied that we have content driven by algorithm, which is what our kids are being exposed to, or we can make a decision that we also are investing in a public service, which is PBS.
Well, we have to take a short break, but we'll have a lot more with Paula Kerger right after this.
This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about what CMOs can learn from the AI transformation at their companies. What are the most common questions you get from CMOs?
Help? I'm actually hearing help a lot from CMOs right now. And it's sort of grouped around their AI transformation. I'm getting the question, how are you in Google Marketing doing your AI transformation? And what can you teach us, or what can we learn from your progress? And really, two deeper questions are, who does the AI work? Where does it sit within my organization and within my agency? And even more critically, how do I get my teams to embrace AI solutions and technologies? How do I take the horse to water and actually make it drink the AI water, as it were?
And what advice are you giving them?
One of the most important is just finding your AI champions. Find those people in your organization who are passionate about technology, passionate about doing their job, and passionate about using AI to solve problems. And then give them more responsibility, more projects, and they can be little change agents within your organization, sparking change of behavior. That's one thing that's really helped us. A second thing, especially for CMOs, is you can't delegate. You have to own the conversation, some of the tactical, practical things that have to be decided within AI. When you push it down and you're not involved, things aren't going to go as fast as you want, as people will revert back to their sort of normal ways of working.
And where can CMOs go to find out more about this?
One of our vice presidents, Torrance Boone, has just published a really good guide, the CMO's Playbook for AI Transformation. So head on over to thinkwithgoogle.com and search for CMO's Playbook for AI Transformation.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ben.
You mentioned how much of the animosity to PBS right now comes from the top, comes from Trump. And I guess I hadn't known this, but I'm sure you're familiar with it, that Sesame Street kind of waged a long war on Donald Trump from like the 80s to the early 2000s. There was a character named Ronald Grump who was planning to demolish Sesame Street and create a Grump Tower. He claimed he owned all the trash.
Grump's the name, Ronald Grump, and I'm a grouch builder. I make places for grouches to live.
Yeah, I've heard of you. Why, you're the grouch who built a swamp in a day when nobody else could do it.
That's me.
Yeah.
And I guess I wonder, do you, in this very strange, personalized moment, do you worry that that's part of the problem?
I mean,
He holds a grudge.
look, I don't know this for a fact. I think he kind of enjoyed being people, even when they're, poked fun of, may perhaps a little bit, enjoy being a character on Sesame Street. I mean, wouldn't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so, I mean, they are a separate production company. This hasn't come up in any of the discussions around, you should be defunded because of Donald Trump. But I do think that when you look at, again, look, I talked to so many people in their 20s and 30s that, they grew up on our kids' content, and it was meaningful to them. And I'm thinking perhaps his kids and grandkids did as well. And so, I do think that what we do there matters, and I think it's important. But then you look across, the range of things that we produce. We, deeply committed to science in particular at a time when I think our country really would benefit from more exposure to science and science literacy. We're very interested in history. We're right at the beginning of the rollout of Ken Burns' new series on the American Revolution, which is clearly, he's been working on this for 10 years. I mean, again, coming back to the point, why PBS? No media organizations can wait 10 years for a documentary to be produced.
So yeah, we had Ken on the show just a few weeks ago. It was a really interesting episode, and he's been, out there as a spokesperson for PBS and for public media. He's gotten a lot of attention. He's done a lot of other interviews and shows that are slightly bigger than ours as well. I'm curious,
maybe just slightly, maybe
just a little. Yes, Rogan beats us most weeks. But, most of the attention that Ken Burns has been getting as a part of the press tour around the American Revolution has been the comments that he's been making about the importance of public media. I'm really curious if you've heard from any big donors, philanthropic organizations, or members of Congress, even, in response to some of these kind of calls. What has him being out there as a spokesperson done for PBS?
He has very strong supporters from all sides of the aisle. And, we did he's been everywhere over the last months, with this film. Part of what he always does is uses the film as a way to get people, sort of thinking about and talking about the issues that he's trying to lay out in front of us. We did a screening on Capitol Hill, and, it was interesting. There were, so many people from both sides of the aisle, including people that voted to defund us, that were there, that were riveted by what he had to say. His funders, by the way, are also similar to what I just described. He has funders across the political spectrum that support his work. And so, I am hopeful that, in addition to the fact that people are suddenly, I think, realizing, oh, this is going to affect the station that's in my own backyard. I think that, when you have a project like this, and with a filmmaker like Ken, that hopefully, again, it will cause people to think again about the decisions that were made and potentially help us to put some resources back.
Paula, I'm curious to go back to what you were saying before about, the screening at the Capitol, and, there's a lot of people who voted for the rescission who are there and who are enjoying this content. And, we had Ken on. We watched some of the American Revolution earlier. It's obviously excellent, super interesting. I mean, when you see those members who are there, do you go up and say, remind them and say, hey, we helped pay for this. This is what the value of this thing is. What do you do in that situation?
I say, we are where we are. How do we get this back on track, right? And so I do think that and I talk to them, because most of them, I've been in their communities, and I talk to them specifically about what their local stations do. And I think that, all of this is, I always try to think of things as the ultimate education, helping people make well-informed decisions. That's what we do. And I think in the case of, members of Congress, I think I have a bit of an understanding of how what happened. But, this can be made right. There were people people that had voted against us that said, we just don't want you to be forward funded. We want to make sure that we deal with you on the budget process. Now, when we got to the budget process, some said, well, we just defunded you. Why would we put money in? It's like,
Right.
remember what you said before.
Right.
So, I think it's going to just be a real effort. And then ultimately, I mean, look, leading up to the vote, I know that millions of people reached out to legislators. I know it. They sent calls, they sent emails and texts and so forth. And, ultimately legislators are responsible to their constituents. And I think they do care about that, and just making sure that if this is meaningful to their constituents, that they're reminded of it.
Do you think part of the answer is more conservative programming?
No, I think, look, I take to heart our responsibility to show a diversity of viewpoint. And look, I don't have to tell you all this because you live in the middle of it. It is harder and harder to do that. People tend to gravitate towards those media outlets and a lot of times podcasts where they know they're going to reach their base, their core. And they're not as willing to put themselves out there and to be in a place where they are not speaking to those who agree with everything they say. And it is harder sometimes to book people, to get people to come in and talk about issues. It's becoming a little easier. We're pushing hard. But we've always been a place. I mean, I mentioned Bill Buckley before. Margaret Hoover's continued firing line. I mean, I'm interested in hearing different perspectives. My gosh, how are we going to move forward as a country if we don't try to understand each other? I want to understand why people think radically different than I do. I want to understand, what it is that is really driving them. And I think the rest of the country would benefit from that too. So, being able to make sure that we are trying to bring forward different perspectives, I think is part of what we do. The other thing that's important to remember is only about 10% of our work is news and public affairs. Most of what we do is kids. I've already talked about, some of our documentaries in science and history.
You also recently aired a documentary called The Last 500 Meters by
Yes.
a director, Michael Pack, who also kind of a MAGA activist. I went to this, so Steve Bannon invited me to the screening a few weeks ago of that, and at the screening, Pack said that PBS had kept that documentary on the shelf for 17 years because in his view you believed it was too pro-military, and that basically this year, in a scramble to mollify right-wingers, you guys put it on air. Is that a correct interpretation?
No, it's not true. I mean, when the program was delivered, and actually, I think if you saw the screening, you did not see what we broadcast. It had that beheading scene was not in the broadcast.
It was very gory.
And it was very gory, and it's just, and to be honest, we also were between different program directors. She had some concerns about the program, and it just got shelved. And to be honest, it got forgotten, and he would periodically remind me, and the show then became older. And I just really worried that, and I don't make program decisions. I want to be clear about that. But we had talked about whether we should, air it, and it felt like it was like an older series. It's still relevant. And Michael and Gina, his wife, who runs his production company, came back to us last year, and they said, we really think you should look at the film. We took a fresh look at it and said, you know what, it is an older film, but it now, I think, after the benefit of some time, makes sense to air it, and we aired it around Veterans Day. But it was not, I mean, we've taken other films from Michael Pack, so it's not like we were afraid to have work from him on our air. We should be doing that. We should be looking for programming, that comes from lots of different places.
You mentioned the BBC earlier, and they have their differences in their funding, and they have the kind of public fee that everybody kind of transparently pays for. But obviously they're in a pretty interesting and remarkable situation over there right now over a series of issues that maybe we should, Ben, just as a sidebar, maybe we should do a BBC episode at some point soon. But I have been struck preparing for this show, listening to some of the complaints that Trump has had about PBS's programming. He said they're like worse than CNN, which my bias here is that I find that to be I find it to be crazy. I think that the PBS programming is pretty clearly down the middle in the same way that I feel like much of NPR's programming on a day-to-day basis is incredibly deliberately very much down the middle. And so I'm kind of curious, do you think that societies that are, this divided, where, this I think very straightforward news programming can be cast as this kind of, lefty, political programming, if societies this divided can kind of sustain public media?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, I do think, again, because I look at the, we try to pay attention to, who's watching our programs. And Rainey Aronson, who runs Frontline, has actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, about making sure that, the programming that we're producing and everything from the subjects that we choose and the way that the programs are produced are fair. And she actually has been very involved in something around transparency, where she publishes a lot of interviews, full interviews, not just what has. So, if you see a documentary, you can then go back and look at the few interviews and you can see what decisions have been made. I mean, I think this is where, the BBC question was around how something was edited. So I think you can see what was actually said and you compare it with what ended up in the show and so forth. But again, it comes back to my earlier point around the fact that I think that there are people that want to see when they watch something that is described as news, that they are having their own, opinions reflected back. And if it's not that, then there clearly is some bias somewhere. I actually don't believe that's where most of the people in this country live. I think most of the people in this country do live in the middle. And I think that most people in this country are really interested in trying to understand issues that are sitting in front of us and want to be able to make good decisions for their families and their communities and ultimately for the country. And that's why our audiences are still very strong, broadcast and on digital platforms. And I think that there is a place for organizations like mine that are viewed as highly trusted, and even in this media environment where everyone has taken a hit in terms of their trust, ours has stayed strong. Part of that is also related to how we're funded. People don't give money, and most of our money, even when there was government funding, came from viewers like you. People don't give money to organizations they don't trust. And we did a lot of polling leading up to the rescission vote. Majority of people who voted for the president supported funding for us. So, I do think that there is, I think there is not only a place for public media in this moment, but I think people are hungering for it. They want to come to a place where, they can trust the information that they're seeing.
Abstracting away from a lot of what you do, which is manage the politics of the United States of America, challenging thing to do. You're also, running a medium-sized media company at a moment when companies of that scale are basically scrambling around to find alliances and partnerships of various sorts. In Paramount Plus's case, that means they're going to buy everything. But there's a whole number of essentially like what they, what the corporate types call subscale streamers, kind of looking to buy or be bought or merge in some way. And I wonder if in this moment you've considered that. The BBC actually would be the obvious partner.
Well, look, we partner with a lot of organizations, not as a full merger, but, we've worked with the BBC and other public broadcasters for years. you're generous in saying we're medium-sized. We're a scrappy little organization that I think punches well above our weight, and we've always looked for ways to really extend the value of the work that we do. I do think what we do is very different. We have built partnerships with other media organizations. Our principal streaming partner has been Amazon, and we built that partnership as we watched the DVD business drying up, and that's how many of our producers actually could make a living, is on the back end around that, and so that's helped us. And so we're always looking. We have a great relationship with YouTube. The YouTube TV deal for us was significant, and it's significant because they are carrying all of our local stations, and that's, to me, also really important. It's not just about Ken, as extraordinary as he is. It's also making sure that our stations in Peoria and in Birmingham, Alabama, and across the country also are able to profile their local programming.
But you wouldn't contemplate like a merger with NPR or with BBC or something like that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, because we are public media organizations that exist in our own. I mean, the relationship with NPR is interesting. Some of our stations are actually both PBS and NPR stations, but they're news organizations, so they are in fact different than what we are. And as I said, BBC, we do a lot of work with them, and we're always talking about additional ways that we can work together. Full merger, I don't think, given the fact that we're separate nonprofits chartered in very different ways, would exactly work. But being able to do more work in partnership, I think, is something that we're always interested in.
Well, Paula, at a moment when not everybody wants to go onto a podcast and be asked tough questions, as you mentioned before, we really appreciate you coming on ours and doing just that. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, it was a pleasure being with you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you
Paula.
for including me. I'll come back anytime.
Yeah, we'll have to do it. We'll take you up on that. So, Ben, you came into this episode a little skeptical of PBS. You're a very, very forward-thinking media executive leader, unsentimental about the past and all the kind of nice things that PBS has done. It's really, what have you done for me lately type of situation. What did you think? Did you come away less skeptical of the whole endeavor, or did you feel like the Republicans did a good job in getting rid of our taxpayer dollars for PBS?
And Paul's an incredibly kind of impressive character. You don't testify on Capitol Hill that many times without and survive that long. We were talking about how our counterparts at the BBC are all resigning all the time, without just an incredibly sure-footedness. But I do think this is a basic problem that she's out there telling Republicans that they got to maintain the thing because of like emergency broadcasting through your television to people who have bunny ears. I mean, just get them all Starlinks; they'll be fine. But I do think that there's this pull toward the past that any organization that has a really elderly audience has, that makes it like hard for them to simultaneously think really hard about the future. And then they are also a production company that produces some of the best documentaries that America's ever made, and that I do think have real staying power wherever they live. But there is this sort of pull backward that I think is about pandering to their Republican rural constituents, but makes it hard for them to look forward.
The challenge that they really have is that I think, and you've seen this time and again, the strongest thing that they have in their favor argumentatively is the kids programming, which I think, she's right, is of a higher quality than the kind of stuff that you'll be getting on YouTube. Did you feel like what do you make of that argument, and why do you think that didn't work?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that is the usual thing, is that they have big birds sitting, come testify, and everybody calms down. I do think it is this. I don't think that their critics are wrong, that it's just this totally different media moment when, if you're really saying we are basically primarily for people who only have broadcast television, and we are a way to get a relatively small, a small slice of rural Americans, that is this really the cheapest way to get them connected to quality programming? I mean, I'm not really joking about Starlinks. I think it would actually probably be cheaper to start getting people Starlinks. And so it feels, just as the technology has changed, that's sort of a niche, more and more of a niche argument. That said, I do think a lot of parents are very freaked out, as she's saying, about what kind of garbage kids are consuming on YouTube, and the notion of quality children's program as a differentiation is something to sell. I mean, it obviously works for Disney, by the way, and it makes sense that it should work for them.
I am also equally kind of unsentimental. I think maybe not as much as you, but I definitely think that I think we both agree, and this comes through in our coverage of a lot of legacy media companies, media organizations, is that it is nice what you've done in the past, but media is so much, what have you done today or yesterday or whatnot. I mean, we feel this way when we get a scoop. It's like it feels great in the moment, and then you wake up the next day and you're like, okay, what's next? And so nostalgia is a tough. Nostalgia is a really tough sell commercially, and it's an even tougher sell when you have to kind of wade into the political arena. But I definitely do think that there's obviously something that's lost when all of the motivation for what's driving content in the media business is what is going to do well in short form video content. What's going to be the most sensational thing that we can put out there? I mean, look, we see this in our own stuff that we work on and that we do, right? Like a lot of our really high quality, good content, it's got to be aimed at a really small slice of people for whom there's an audience for that. I would love for the masses to be really interested in our analytical breakdowns of, what's going on, the tectonic changes in corporate media. But the reality is that not many of them care very much. And I think that is, you see that challenge all across media. And I do think that there really is a need for a kind of media that isn't necessarily 100% driven by profit, that is trying to put out good quality stuff for the public, at least in theory. I mean, in practice, I don't really know, but in theory, I think I do think that that's a valuable mission. So yeah, I mean, that's my bias kind of coming into this.
Yeah, I know Paula kept talking about viewers like you. I guess she meant viewers like you.
Yeah, but it is true. Like, I mean, if you think about like really interesting public access television, I'm sure the real problem is that there is so much good, mesmerizing, salacious kind of, and even more interesting and compelling programming that's out there, and you have access to all of it through the internet. So you might not watch a show on local access television. But of course, this is coming at a time when there are a lot of communities that don't have access to any sort of information, things that are going on in their towns. So it's I do think that I hope that they figure out a way to kind of keep going in those places, because it does feel more valuable, a little bit less valuable in a New York media market, though.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Well, thanks for getting Paula on. She's a very consequential character right now.
Well, that is it for us this week. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Mixed Signals from us here at Semaphore. Our show is expertly produced by Manny Fidel, with special thanks to Josh Billinson, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, Tori Kaur, and Daniel Haft. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor is Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who earlier this year was not happy with NPR funding, but nowadays, who knows? Could be. She could be.
Maybe she loves the media supporter. Now.
Maybe. I mean, she's doing a lot of it. I think maybe we should have her on our show. It could be interesting. We have to find the media angle for that. But if you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to review us.
And please sign up for our media newsletter, where Max constantly breaks news out every Sunday night.
And sometimes Ben does too, when he's got something good. Still.
Once in a while.